Hi guys, welcome back to Lunatic Astrology. I'm your astrologer, Lori Lothian. Today we're talking about Jupiter going direct on October the 18th and as well as Mercury moving into forward motion as well, and what it might mean for you in your chart based on your rising sign. And also you can adjust that for sun and moon. Today I'm having astrologer Dan Burkett join me of Divine Timing Astrology to share his thoughts. So it's not always just me talking at you about the sky. Just realized my hair is a mess. I just came in from outside. So whatever, you're dealing with me rushing to the computer with an unbrushed hair. So I'm just waiting to pop into our Zoom room.
Okay.
So anyway, I do have Dan Burkett in the room with me right now, and we are talking on October 18th about the sky. So Dan, tell us a little bit about where people can find you now, and I'll put that link below in the description box.
Yeah, I use the handle Divine Timing on YouTube and Facebook. So if you look up Divine Timing, you'll be able to find me.
Wonderful, thank you. So, and I know Dan from, he was a student with my teacher of Nightlight Astrology at Tuta Baba. If you're thinking of learning astrology from the Hellenistic style, he's a great teacher. And by the way, I always plug him. His course starts this November for year one. Okay, so, and I'll put a link to Tuta Baba's Nightlight Astrology year one class below, because you make really good friends with other astrologers when you're learning. So like that, me and Dan are an example. So what do you think about Jupiter going direct after his lengthy retrograde since June 21st, ironically on the same day of Mercury going retrograde in Libra? And any thoughts about the general sky feel of that today and onward?
Well, I think it comes as a bit of a relief after some, well, in the midst of some difficult astrology going on. It's always nice to have the benefic planet go direct. I mean, in my own personal life, I'm kind of coming out of a hiatus where I was going through a big health crisis that had me knocked out for a couple months. And it's like, if you look at the timing of when I was knocked out, that was kind of like when the outer planets like Saturn and Jupiter had gone retrograde. And now that I'm actually like able to like sit down and like have this do something like this, like that is like, I would say, a manifestation of having Mercury and Jupiter going direct. It's kind of fitting that it kind of came together on this day that we can do something like this, right?
Yeah, because you were doing a lot of stuff with me before you got sick and actually hospitalized for 2 months. And that is such an example of being clobbered by two planets turning backward at the same time, you know. So, I mean, yes, for Saturn for sure, turning back in Aquarius. I think it was May 23rd, and then Jupiter on June 21st. So, and me too. Like, I'm sure anyone listening to this is going to talk about the same feeling of being in a quagmire and having things feeling. For me, this is my first house. I'm Aquarius rising. The whole of Jupiter retrograde, I mean, that part of it, and Saturn felt to me like I was in quicksand, and like I was just chopping wood, carrying water, going one step at a time, almost like I was in the woods and there was no path and I could only take small navigational steps. There was no big bold vision, no big dreams, no big anything. And then this morning I woke up, praise Jupiter going direct and Mercury as of about 3 Pacific today. And I had this complete aha about what I wanted to do next. I mean, I'm not doing it, but I know what it is. And even that, waking up with that in my mind from my sleep, felt like such a relief. I think that's the key for me, is that I feel an energy of relief. It's very tangible for me.
I was just thinking too that like there's certain things that just pop into my mind in that from I'm my birthday is coming up, so I've got a new solar return coming up, but I had a really like I had a lunar eclipse in my solar return chart last year, and I was kind of like, there's some stuff going down, but I wasn't necessarily anticipating this bad of a health crisis. But I think that was the other thing that came to mind too. I just kind of loaded it up quickly on my phone, was that I had Aquarius as a first house in my solar return chart last year.
Oh my
And
God, that is so apt.
yeah, so it's like this is like all this stuff about Jupiter and Saturn going direct that's in my first house. But if you look back at where Jupiter and Saturn were during my solar return, they were in the 12th house. So it's my solar return house. My solar return has Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, the big lineup, like all stacked up in my 12th house, with Saturn in Capricorn, having overpowering everything. And, it's like Hellenistic Saturn and joy in 12th. And this is all stuff that if I was like, I don't know. This is when you look at a solar turn chart, you don't want to you don't necessarily look at that and read that like, oh, damn, I'm going to end up in the hospital this year. But like, that's
Yeah,
sort of how it worked. Like
that's
you can look at
interesting.
it in retrospect and see that kind of stuff, right?
It's an incredible advocacy thing you just gave for the accuracy of solar returns, which I've been using for quite a few years. And especially if you're not familiar with one of the 12th house meanings, it is the house of hospitals where Dan ended up. And that is like why I said, oh, that's so darn apt, that the solar return actually reflected this whole hardship, difficulty, and hospitalization story. How interesting is that? Now, if you're listening to this, having Jupiter going direct after his sluggy retrograde is going to, and Mercury as well. This is the Aquarian and Libran parts of the chart. And, Mercury retrograde for only 3 weeks isn't the end of the world, compared to Jupiter for months at a time. So we will be bringing up the sky on a chart in a minute to look at it and talk to you about maybe what it means for you based on your rising sign, your sun sign, and your moon sign. And we're just going to collaboratively tune in. But there's one last little piece that I learned about today that Dan and I were talking about before we came on the call, and that's called Antisha. And there's also contra Antisha, and that's a feature of the chart where planets have a secret or hidden relationship, a conversation with each other that is under the table, as Dan said, or behind the scenes or the back room. And, Mercury going direct today, and I credit Achyuta Bhava, my teacher, for mentioning this on his channel, and I caught my ear today. I had noticed that when Mercury going direct today, but yet as he's in a direct Antisha to Neptune, the god of illusion, delusion, fantasy, and higher things like imagination, storytelling, transcendent vibes, unconditional love, oceanic consciousness, take it from the low to the high. There's something else really interesting happening here. Like there's a little bit more than meets the eye that Mercury might be capable of offering each of us as he finally pops direct at 10 degrees of Libra in the sky. And for those of you listening who have planets close to 10 Libra, or at 10 degrees perhaps of the cardinal signs as well, Aries, Libra, Capricorn, and Cancer, any planets close to that degree, especially your intimate planets like your sun, moon, or your rising sign and midheaven angles, you're really going to maybe have something quite interesting happen regarding this way Mercury goes direct in that conversation with Neptune. So we might talk a little bit about that. Any thoughts just in general about a Mercury secret backroom deal with Neptune in general?
Well, I mean, the one thing that comes to my mind was that we're doing this on the full moon, and the last full moon lunation we had was in Pisces. So that moon was definitely kind of resonating that Neptune influence. So if you can think back to what was going on, I mean, for me, I kind of made a video where I was going through, because I was making notes basically because I was noticing things happening during my stay at the hospital where I could be like, yeah, this is a real Neptune and Pisces kind of day, or this is a real, Uranian kind of day with the stuff that was going on. So I think that the general kind of like moods and themes that might have been coming up under the last full moon are kind of like sneaking their way back in with the Neptune Antisha, and with the Pisces, there's definitely maybe a more emotional kind of. What I'm noticing is that for an Aries, a moon in Aries, it kind of has that. To me, it feels more like I kind of want to just relax and take a nap. It doesn't feel quite as Aries as I was expecting it to be. I'm not quite as like worked up and fiery as I would have expected from an Aries full moon. So I think that maybe the Antisha between Neptune and might be kind of cooling things down a bit.
Yeah, especially.
I mean, that's.
Yeah, since especially, Mercury's doing all of his, movement in the sign opposite of Aries, right? So, he's like, kind of having a story over on the other side of that moon, right? So, that's a very good point. I kind of feel like what you're saying is true. And in my video for the Aries moon, I did address some of the sweetness in the sky with a Jupiter Juno connection to the moon that's very soft for both of them, sextiles and trine energy. So that could be what we're also feeling is some mitigating influence between the king and queen of Mount Olympus, husband and wife duo, smoothing out some of the edges of the moon. Let's pull up the chart and see what we get. And I love that you're in the hospital. I love that you're actually doing your astrology. Like, oh, what a Uranian day is that? I don't know what your limited life is like in a hospital room, right? Like, what kinds of range of things you're having happen to you.
Well, there's certain days, there were days that were like busy days and days that were there was nothing happening. But generally, when you're in a hospital, it's generally better news when it's not a busy, when you're not getting rushed over into like having, procedures done and people like scanning you and stuff. When they don't have to do that, it's generally good. But like, that's what like I explained, I kind of went over this. I don't know how many people are actually be interested in this, but I have to wear this bracelet basically, which says I've got a filter that they put in one of my arteries. They kind of put me under a little bit with some drugs, and like I didn't see what was going on, but they put a tube down my neck and like put this device in because I had a blood clot to stop a blood clot from traveling up but then while they were doing that, they had me under x-ray, and then they found that there already was a blood clot in my lungs, and then it was this sort of like, oh my god. And all this happened like right as like Venus and Uranus and the moon in Taurus, it was all like perfect, everything was hitting each other. It was all this Scorpio, Taurus, Uranus stuff was getting like perfectly set off right when I was getting that procedure done, basically. Like
Oh,
it timed up perfectly. And I so
what
that
is your Gemini? I forgot your rising sign. What house is Gemini? That's the lungs, right? Gemini. What house is?
Gemini's eighth house for me.
So there you go. That's one of the more difficult houses as well. A blood clot in the lung is kind of terrifying.
Yeah, like
I don't know.
it definitely was a heavy trip to deal with people telling me that I could like suddenly die any minute or something like that. But thankfully they got it under control, and I'm getting back to normal. I gotta have to take blood thinners for a while though to treat it. And I was in my channel too. I was talking. There was this big thing about like I had a bleeding problem, but then I had to take blood thinners, and it was like this very Mars and Libra about like the balance. Like you have to find the delicate balance between two things, or else Mars is going to tip the scale into one problem or the other. So it really, like, there's stuff like that I'm just like, it really works, but I don't hear people talk about this side of astrology too much. But when it's when this is what the main thing in my life is, that's what I'm paying attention to, right?
Absolutely. I mean, oh my God, I totally get that. And what's your rising again?
Scorpio.
Oh, that's right. Of course. Well, Mars is your ruler, so Mars would definitely be trying his best in Libra to tip the balance in your side on your side. Being a Libra rules a natal chart.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm just gonna like the thing I'm wondering is like next month we have Mars and Scorpio, better dignified, but setting off the square to Saturn and stuff. So it's like I wonder
Well,
how
yeah, but
that's gonna play out, right?
yeah, but he's still invisible until around the 23rd of the month. So I don't think
Oh, that's funny. The 23rd, really? Because the 23rd is the day where I'm supposed to be off my prednisone.
oh,
I'm
good.
like, I'm coming. That they're like, we want you off the steroid
It's
by
like
the
Mars
20.
is
So
saying,
another thing that time,
Mars is saying,
there's like all the
it's your coming out party. Okay.
yeah.
He's coming into visibility, and then you'll be able to say, okay, that was the ordeal. Thanks, Whew.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's
Let me
funny.
share.
Like a couple hours before we started this call, I had a phone call with my family doctor who I haven't talked to since I was in the hospital, right? So it's like, again, Mercury backtracking to the family doctor and then, okay, touch bases and move forward. There's all these little things that are like really literal manifestations that I see can play out. And this is, for me, it's kind of cool, just like rather than speculate about what could happen, it's like no, this is what is happening, and it works really well with the astrology right now, right?
Absolutely. It's a really good idea for people who are into astrology to watch the daily action of the sky and see what correlates there are to the real life experience. I've certainly noticed it's pretty damn acute. Like, I burned my arm and I have a huge scar here like now because it was a really deep burn. I didn't realize how deep it was till after. It was the day that Mars was opposing my Mars in the sky. And I'm like, you can't make this, up. And so I'm like, yeah, I did it. Mars burned me. Thank you. And I so rarely burn myself, even though I've got 4 planets in Aries. I'm like a fire person. I'm careful with fire. But this case, I was incautious, and Mars was sitting across the sky in Virgo in my 8th house, not a necessarily strong place, and I got burned. So yeah, you can pay attention to these things. So let me pull up the sky, and we'll take a peek. And I'm trying to cue it for Aries. So there we go. Well, Dan, that was our intro conversation in our little fun gathering of finally seeing you after so many months, in your incognito hospital stay.
Yeah, it
Okay,
was
good.
actually only 5 weeks in the hospital, but I was like, I don't know. I was working with my family doctor, hoping I could get things. I was thinking like, oh, maybe they'll give me drugs, and I'll take some pills for a week and I'll be better. And I wasn't. I was kind of like naively not expecting that I was gonna. It was as serious as it was, and yeah, it was good. It was good that I went to the hospital though and got
I
that
remember
handled.
you told me that you were feeling really crappy. You thought you had an infection,
Well,
but
I mean, the doctor originally thought it was like a bacterial infection. Apparently, it ended up being colitis that I have, which is more of my immune system overreacting to a minor infection kind of thing, right?
yeah. And it's good they figured out what was wrong with you so that you can begin to treat yourself properly. So let's talk sky stories. We're going to go through all the signs together, and we're just going to playfully talk about some thoughts we may have each of us. So using your rising sign is going to have the most circumstantial accuracy, but you can certainly look at your moon or your sun. I think that both of those have value. And maybe it's more important to look at your sun if you're born in the day, or the moon if you're born at night, but not necessarily. Just experiment and find out for yourself what's true. And so we'll start off with Aries, and I'll make a comment and see what Dan thinks. Just grabbing what jumps out at me first. There's a lot of busyness in the sky. I think I have my asteroids in there. So no, I don't. I took them out. Good. So if you're not asteroid a junkie like I am, you won't get distracted. Okay, so for you, Aries, sun, moon, and rising sign folk, first of all, the direct motion of Jupiter, which is the main thing that I love to see to happen today, after Saturn has also gone direct, is happening up in your natal 11th house up here. And there's a lot of good things that happen in the 11th house in general, right? House of friends and allies who want to help you, and the actualization of your future hopes and visions and dreams, and the house of acquisition or great gains. And so this is a place of goodness in general. It's a house of good spirit. And so that movement into direct motion, well, Jupiter's also in a like sweet little flowing trine to Mars in the 7th house, might bring you guys some kind of breakthroughs in new friendships, new partnerships, new relationships, some sort of actualization of a dream or a goal regarding a project you're working on, and within a larger community, maybe the 11th house. But the energy of Mars coming from the 7th could bring you also maybe a new contract, a legal agreement that benefits you financially. Any thoughts about any other possibilities there? What do you feel, Dan?
Um, There's just an addition that like Jupiter has its joy in the 11th house. So for an Aries rising, it's especially what can I say? It's a good sign to have a Jupiter 11th house transit going direct. And I'm not, that Mars in Libra is a bit trouble because it's the opposite sign from its home, and it's making that opposition to the full moon. But it's being the ruler of an Aries chart, then you might be used to dealing with that Mars energy, and it's sort of working with that nice Jupiter and joy. So it generally, I don't know, seems like a positive thing. And yeah, I would say if there's anything sort of that's felt like maybe stuck or at a standstill with working with groups or larger organizations, or if you're like, maybe on a board or a committee or in a team or something like that, then things might start coming together. The 7th house is kind of similar, but maybe more with one-on-one kind of interactions with people, whether that's like relationships or business partnerships or something like that. So they're both kind of social houses, though, the 7th house and the 11th house, one being more personal, one being more group oriented. So there could be that Aries social, you put the air element with the social quality to see some sort of movement happening with that.
Yeah, I agree totally about that. I forgot about the joy part for those Aries, sun, moon, and rising. Yeah, such a beautiful spot for Jupiter for you guys since he got there last December, and it will be till December 28th this year, minus a little sneak into Pisces in the middle of the year behind us. I also would say, to add to what you just said, Mars is invisible, and that's something I keep talking about because I really am more of a Babylonian in the tradition of what the sky really looks like, the astrology of ancient Babylon. in his invisibility, it means that he may not be able to outpicture something that he's promising. But, considering that his visibility is coming around the third week of November, the weekend of the 22nd, well, the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, he's going to start to become available to be seen as a morning Mars, then possibly that could be also for you, Aries, a sign that things that are being negotiated, seventh house, deals that are being made, documents are being signed, messages are going back and forth with Mercury, that maybe some of the outpicturing of the final results will have to wait, maybe, until Mars goes into visibility. I might bring that up for all signs. And a last little note is that we did sort of sneak a little bit about the Antisha into the introduction. So I'm going to speak to this Aries, Sun, Moon, and Mercury, me. I had this waking up from my dream last night, right? In which I had a vision of something I want to create that just came to me from my sleep. And in fact, I dreamt last night, you're going to laugh at this, Dawn. I was hanging out with Kelly Surtees and Austin Kopek from the Astrology podcast with Chris Brennan. It was the coolest dream. It was like me and Austin were totally getting along, but the dream connected to the waking creation thought that I had and wrote down and planned and plotted. And the reason I bring it up is that that Antisha, that secret relationship between Mercury at 10 degrees and Neptune at 20, and that's because it adds up to 30, is literally Neptune, the god of imagination and storytelling and visions from the house is often associated with dreams or reveries and insights from that realm, really did play out for me in this day of Mercury's direct motion. So for each of you Aries, there might be something like that, a download, an inspiration, a dream, not just today, but in the next couple of days.
I'm not Aries rising, but now that you mentioned it, I had a bunch of weird dreams last night as well. I kept kind of waking up from dreams, but I don't remember them as clearly. I didn't get to hang out with Austin Kopek in my dreams.
It was really fun. I was like, oh my God, I'm not starstruck or anything with the guy. I really like him though. I'm on his Patreon community, but it was just kind of fun because it was a symbolic dream, right? Neptune was delivering symbols for my consumption. So Aries, I think we covered you pretty well. I hope that gives you some sense of hope and optimism as you go forward with that Jupiter direct until the end of the year in your 11th house. And I believe it is around December 28th that he makes his grand exit. Okay, so we're going to do the Taurus, Sun, Moon, and Rising, and I'm going to let Dan start this time. What do you think?
Well, Jupiter's going direct in the 10th house. So, 10th house of your daily activity, the daily grind, or what you're doing for your kind of work or main purpose in life. It's a angular house, so it should be one of the more it should be noticeable for Taurus rising having it go direct in an angular house. One thing that I like about doing this with Jupiter and Mercury going direct on the same day, and they're both in these air signs, is that it's like you can see that like the 6th house is kind of more of like the grunt work, the tedious, repetitive, the dirty work that you don't, it's not as glamorous, whereas the 10th house maybe you might be getting more kind of public recognition for. It's kind of 10th house is more of like the public spotlight, whereas the 6th house is like, doing the cleaning up and doing the dishes afterwards kind of thing. So you've got both sides of that going direct for Taurus rising. So it's kind of like the dirty work and the not so dirty work, but it's generally kind of a productive, productive work oriented kind of shift for Taurus rising.
Yeah, and it almost feels too like if you've been feeling stuck in like you hate your job or things aren't working or you're not getting recognized or you wanted a promotion or a raise and nothing was working or you were afraid to ask or you asked but nobody got back to you, Mercury retrograde, your email got stuck in the bottom of your boss's box, this could be like an advancement in your career, in your work, in your collegiate status, good news in the workplace basically, or forward momentums that are possible. So I find that exciting. And I'm wondering with that Antisha to Neptune in the 11th, that some good developments in work could come through a friend who's an ally, like, oh, I've got an opening in the company I'm working for. Let me recommend you to my boss, or, something like that, being supported by the 11th house people in your life.
Neptune's kind of a funny planet to be getting support from, though, because Neptune's kind of like the no boundaries, kind of like outer limits kind of thing. Like it's like somebody could have like you have 11th house person has a really overblown and fantastic idea, like this person is the greatest, you have to, somebody's giving like really inflated or dreamy kind of recommendations for you, right? You get support, but it's kind of what does Neptunian support look like? I don't know, I'm just kind of playing
Well,
with
yeah,
it.
Neptune's retrograde too until like December 1st or 2nd. So he's not necessarily telling true stories right now, or he's telling strange, covert, weird ones. But if it's a house of that Taurian person's dreams and aspirations and higher visions for their life, and he's retrograde, maybe this Antisha with Mercury is for some of you Taurus folk, you're going to have a touch point with an old vision or dream or hope for your life that's going to come through that 11th house, which can also be friends and allies, but also groups you belong to, collectives that you are a part of, like the group, this communities that you associate with.
Yeah, it's also interesting. Eventually, I mean, this is a bit further down the line, but eventually Venus is going to make a square to that Neptune from Sagittarius.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then Venus being generally signifying friends and social support and stuff like that. So, it'd be interesting to see how that plays out once you get a Venus square to
Oh
Neptune as
yeah,
well
especially
later on in the month.
yeah, the Taurians are Venus ruled, and that could be that could be a sweet little turning point in some way because let's see, Venus exits Sag around November 5th, so that's not too far off from this October recording. So yeah, we shall see what happens there, but it definitely feels like to me that Antisha could operate as a activation of an older hope, dream, and wish from Neptune's retrograde, right? Being revitalized, but through some weird way. Who knows? I don't know. It's like hard. We're trying to make sky stories, guys. It's just like it's almost like I don't know what it is. It's like a game,
It's the Antisha is already, because Antisha is like the hidden aspect, right?
secret
So
or
it's secretive, but then like Neptune itself is like one of the more mysterious kind of, like if Antisha on its own is kind of hidden and secretive, but I feel like Neptune just kind of makes it even weirder because
Mhm.
Neptune's probably one of the stranger outer planets, just how is it being more about like altered realities and visionary states and all this. There's all that kind of stuff that gets mixed in with Neptune. So it does. I don't know. There's room to get creative with it, anyways.
Okay, well, we should ask our Tauruses to tell us what happened because we're having a hard time parsing how this Antisha could look in people's charts. So let us know down the road. All right, Taurus, we hope that gives you some sense of directionality. You've been going through a lot of intensity with the Uranus transit since 2019, February in earnest through your first house. So that's just a part of your story to have a lot of change in your identity and all of that. But I think this particular direct motion of two planets today is going to feel like moving forward in your career, as Dan said. It's very external. It's going to show up as real evidence of something changing, career and work. Yeah.
I was thinking, with Neptune in the 11th, it could have something to do with like, people who are into like spiritual communities and stuff like that, like a sangha or something, like, because there's definitely a very religious, spiritual theme. And then if you bring that in with the 6th house, you've got like selfless service, and that could be an angle you could go with, right?
Yeah. Someone invites you to help them with some kind of, like a spiritual community event, like the church is doing a soup kitchen, or, because service or seva can be 6th house. Yeah. You might find that you're involved in something that is of service that also has a deep spiritual community connection. Yeah. Good call. Good call. All righty. Let's talk about the Gemini risings. All right, Gemini rising. First of all, just reminding you, we all honor you. We bow before you, and we give you a lot of love that you've been at the brunt of the eclipse cycle since, oh my God, since November and December of last year when the eclipses started activating your first house. So we honor you. Next, it's a lot of change going on for a lot of you Gemini rising in particular in your identity. So against that backdrop, being stuck with that Jupiter retrograde since June 21st, and then Mercury just in the last 3 weeks. A lot of your directionality may have felt like most of us, like an airplane that had stalled and you were just hoping to pull it out of a nosedive. I would say with Jupiter in that 9th house, this is a house of faith and how we perceive our connection to the divine, how we figure out our spiritual and life philosophy, and also the meaning of our life, the dharmic factor, our dharma, the purpose and meaning of our life. I'm wondering if some of you Geminis are going to be directed with Jupiter, toward that with more clarity, and particularly even in terms of studies, it could support that, because sometimes your ninth house can be a course of study in higher education, or even like mentored by somebody for a few months, that could also be coming to you in the next while as something you want to do. You may have thought about it, but maybe now you have direct momentum around getting something going there. And then I guess Mercury would say, I think he'd say from the fifth house, in that trine to Jupiter, are you having fun? Can we have some joy? Does this inspire you? Do you want to date someone in your educational setting? Do you want to flirt with somebody in a spiritual community? Those are some playful thoughts. And how about you, Dan? What would you like to add?
Yeah, I was mainly thinking from a practical point of view, the ninth house has to do with higher learning and things that you kind of need to have a teacher or things you're not going to be learning on your own, that you need to go to school for, have the higher institutions deliver the knowledge. But I was also thinking that now that Jupiter is direct, Jupiter starts moving pretty quickly, and it's only going to be around New Year's that Jupiter is in Pisces.
Yeah,
So it's like
it's December 29th is the ingress date, I think.
yeah, so it's like almost New Year's Eve.
Mhm.
But so you've only really have like a few months of Jupiter in Aquarius before Jupiter's in Pisces. So it's like you're going to be making, if you're going to do anything to like go ahead and move forward when it comes to education, it's like you've got a few months to do it. And then Jupiter is going to be in Pisces, which is a 10th house, and it's going to be more that 10th house putting the work in kind of thing, right? So this is going to be like a preliminary thing to initiate some sort of educational thing. And then in 2022 is going to be, you're going to have 6 months or so of Jupiter in Pisces, where it was a well dignified Jupiter in Pisces. So it'd be a good time for that, bringing that expansive thing into, anything that involves work and putting the energy into it, that kind of stuff. And I think, fifth house can be kind of like, flirty and romantic and stuff like that. It could also just be like having fun. And I think with the trine, with them both being air signs, you could be, it helps to learn things that you enjoy learning about, like bringing the passion into, learning new things and growing and evolving and stuff like that. So I think it could be a productive time for Gemini risings.
Yeah, and with Mercury being the ruler for you Geminis, he's really going to try to get you to really take on that energy of whatever he can do with you in Libra, regarding things to do with being filled with joy or inspirited, inspired by what you're up to over the next while. He just spent a long time there going backward. Maybe you had to really reassess, where's my joy spark? Where's the fun? He likes to travel, and so does Jupiter, and this is a ninth house. So maybe you think, Dan, some people are planning a trip because of the direct motion, especially to a foreign shore.
Well, again, it's possible, but I think you got to consider that Saturn is still there with with Jupiter in Aquarius, and
Saturn just says it's a safe trip.
yeah, it's good. Like, you're gonna have to. Jupiter just isn't like playing by his own rules. He's overseen by Saturn and Saturn's own temple. You know what I mean? So whatever Jupiter does, you're gonna have to check in with grumpy old man Senex, with setting all the rules and limitations and stuff like. So to me, it kind of makes more sense for like the structure of an institution, like a university or something, like, rather than a travel. But if it makes sense for you have to kind of look at your own life and see whether it makes sense or not, I guess, right?
Yeah. I think it's Saturn to keep your trip like sensible, safe, sturdy, maybe, whatever, he wouldn't make you, there's no one going off to like, the heart of the Congo with this particular configuration to see if they can find Ebola,
Yeah.
So yeah, and then we have, I hate these pesky Antisha that I almost think we shouldn't have talked about because neither of us can really define what to do with it. But let's keep playing really briefly with it. Maybe for some of you, the secret backroom conversation behind the scenes and connection or rapport between Mercury in the house of joy, play, pleasure, sex, romance, and your children, well, and Neptune up in the 10th, which is a longer story that's going on for you guys, finding your career path a little foggy. I'm wondering if some of you guys wouldn't have a, just make play with me, a secret connection with somebody in the workplace of your career. Aspiring to idealized and fantastical love. Just one thought. Don't take this Antisha too seriously, guys. We're really playing with unknown variables here. Me and Dan and I. How about you, Dan? Any thought?
Um, I mean, that could be one way to interpret it. I was just thinking more broadly that it's like you've got Antisha between the 5th and the 10th. That's sort of like work and play, or I mean, I think that I like the stuff about like parents and stuff like that, though, because 5th house relates to the children, and like if a parent Gemini rising would be watching this, it could be like, you know, there's oftentimes like people, you've got a pretty stacked 5th house, and it's like that can really kind of distract away from, like, you know, you're not doing as much career and stuff. You're like a stay-at-home parent or something like that. Whereas with that Antisha between Neptune and the 10th, it's like some opportunity comes through where you might have like given up on, you know, some kind of like aspiration, but then there's like that, you know, the dream, like don't give up on the dream or something, and that the fun, the passion of the 5th house of like something you like to do. It could be like some, I don't know, this is just a different angle maybe that I'm not really, Lori kind of threw this at me really quickly, so I'm just kind of playing with this off the top of my head with seeing what I can come up with, right? But that's one thing maybe, right?
Yeah, we were both doing the off the top of the head with the Antisha, and also who knows, because Neptune's retrograde and doesn't go direct until sometime in early, like December 1st or 2nd. Maybe even this retrograde direct motion Mercury is promising the delivery of some news, you know, that Neptune will be in charge of, but down the road. So always take what we're saying in great I don't know, grain of salts, many grains of salts on the Antisha. That's where we're least experienced. Let's move forward and talk about the Cancer, Sun, Moon, and Rising sign. Who went first last time? Me? Your turn.
Yeah, well, I mean, so now you've got Jupiter in the 8th and Mercury in the 4th. So, I mean, you know, I don't do the whole 12-letter alphabet thing, but you do have that 4th house Cancer thing where it brings in that home and family, more the private life kind of thing. And with I usually interpret 8th house as things to do with like dependency. So it's kind of like, I don't necessarily, I don't know, I don't want to be like a downer, but it's I think 4th house, 8th house stuff is a little bit more difficult maybe. But still having Jupiter going direct in the 8th house is still like a helpful it's still it kind of gives a sense of not being as stuck with 8th house issues of like maybe whether that's like debts you have to pay off, or if you've got, you know, people that are like, if you're a parent, you've got kids that are dependent on you or stuff like that, that there could be some sort of like things are moving forward and you're having some progress, working out some problems. But it's not, you know, eighth house is like kind of a difficult house. I mean, eighth house also has to do with things like, I don't know. I often see it with 8th housers as being like, you know, substance use and addictions and, you know, not that fun stuff with that. So I don't, you know, there could be maybe kind of a turnaround, right? Like that's what a retrograde is, basically a turnaround. So if there's any of these things you're having trouble with, it's like an opportunity to kind of like start changing directions and moving in a different way. So that, I don't know, those are just some quick thoughts anyways on the 4th, 8th house stuff.
Well, yeah, and also I think it was Firmicus Maternus, but I can't recall for sure. In one of my readings in Hellenistic astrology, it was mentioned that it could have been somebody else, but there's a gist back there in the ancient understanding that Jupiter is actually good in the 8th. Like it's the only planetary body that is like thumbs up to be in the 8th, and partly because it often signifies in a natal chart that you stand to inherit money. So the other feeling is, there's bounty in the eighth house for money to come to some of you Pisces, Sun, Moon, and Ascendants, maybe through a settlement of money an inheritance, with a what do you call it? Like a alimony, palimony, spousal money separations. I have a client who is a Cancer rising and just got a breakthrough in the court filings for an inheritance this like yesterday. So I'm wondering if that too is like a little bit of what could happen. And with Mars trining from the fourth house, whatever Jupiter bounty could happen in a money house for you, including the elimination of debt from, like, say, credit cards or bank loans, that this could in fact benefit your home life or cause even something to change significantly in the home life, even maybe in terms of where you want to live, maybe even in terms of your home.
At a really mundane level, with the fourth house and eighth house, it could also be like something to do with mortgages, like paying off your mortgage or remortgaging your house, or even like selling a house or something like that, or could be also shared living, like going in on like a commune or something like that, sharing a living space or something. Those are all these are really mundane themes, but those are things that might be relevant to a Cancer rising chart.
And you Cancer risings, if you aren't buying or selling property and all this goodness just popped up here, like getting the ideal loan or getting the ideal mortgage, as Dan said, maybe, but I'm not going to guarantee it, with Mars still invisible until the third week of November, some of this true like factoring in of, the tangible, visible results. And I keep bringing Mars up because he's stationing. I mean, because when Jupiter stationed at 22 degrees to turn around, Mars was, whispering beautiful sweet nothings at him from the fourth house of real estate. So Mars may have a hand in making momentum around money and home and land and real estate. It maybe happen, but you may have to wait for the outpicturing until the third week of November fully. I just maybe not. And that pesky Antisha, I'm just going to say, well, maybe people in your home, domestic environment, or situations with communications in your home and domestic private life environment may have a kind of unseen connection to things to do with your higher purpose in life, your call for your life's meaning of your life. I find that if you're a Cancer rising, and I have two people I know who are, they've been going through a lot of trouble since Neptune entered their ninth house back in 2011, late 2011, with really defining what they want to do with their life, like the purpose or the meaning or the thing that they're on the planet for. It seems to be endemic to a lot of Cancer rising, especially. So maybe there's secret news from Mercury coming from the home base. Maybe your child looks up at you, goes, Daddy, you know what? I think that you really should be a doctor. How's that for some makeup stories?
My internet connection just dropped during that, so I kind of missed your story or your take on Neptune there.
I was just saying Neptune. Well, I'm not going to say it again. So do you have any thoughts? Because if yours is different than mine, that would be interesting.
Yours, from what I caught, yours sounded more elaborate. I was just basically like, if anything, you put fourth and ninth together, long distance learning, right? Like it's good, but Zoom University, like learning from home or whatever, right? Maybe, and then if you could bring in the Neptune spiritual thing, like making an altar space in your house, or making a puja table or something, right? Like those are just a few quick kind of associations that I could come up with.
Oh, I like that. I really like that. Yeah, that's a really sweet one. All right, we're going to keep at our hopefully decent clip. Leo, Sun, Moon, and Rising sign folk, you get the Jupiter energy happening in the house of primary love relationships, commitments, business partnerships can sometimes be there. And you can also sometimes find that this is a house where your clients live because you do one-on-one work with them. So if you've been stuck in this part of your life, your marriage was on kind of like a really weird quagmire, or your primary business and client relationships were pretty well sucking for some reason, or didn't feel like you were making any momentum or movement forward, beginning at around the 21st of June when the retrograde started, you might find that this has turned around, and now you're starting to get a sense of, oh my gosh, I feel like I actually like my husband, or we finally found a solution that's what do you call it, bountiful and fortunate for both of us in our challenges we've been having. or if you wanted to get a legal agreement off the ground and it was delayed and you couldn't get a contract signed. That's often very seventh house things. Courts are ninth, but the actual negotiations are often, and signings are often seventh. Then maybe finally this, because justice is Jupiter, so this could finally go forward. That includes those of you struggling with settlements around divorce, as well as just fortifying a marriage. And I think with Mercury in your third house, this is a house that has to do sometimes with siblings, aunts and uncles and cousins, the extended family network. But it also can have to do with things going on in your immediate environment, near cafes and clubs and movie theaters where you live. So I don't know, or trips and travel you want to take, especially not too far away, not to like strange and foreign places. So maybe you and your partner, I'm just making bullshit up, could get along to go on a trip, and this will fortify your relationship. Maybe it's also just about the freedom to get moving again in the idea of travel somewhere that you want to go. These are both happening as openings right now in places that were closed, especially with Mars in the third house. He does like to take journeys and gallivant around in adventures, and he's kind of been stuck in a retrograde zone with a lot of chunky complications being so close to the sun. So we could be looking at planning a trip, maybe not taking it. Mars, I think, has to get out of the beams for a real good trip to happen, but maybe a Thanksgiving trip, because he'll be directing American Thanksgiving. He'll be out of the beams of the sun by American Thanksgiving. What do you think?
But I'm listening to what you're talking about with like handling marriage difficulties and stuff like that. I'm just thinking what I mentioned earlier for one of the other signs we did was that, Jupiter is, now that Jupiter is going direct, Jupiter picks up speed pretty quickly. And then it's around New Year's Eve, a few days before New Year's Eve, that Jupiter's into Pisces. So it's like, Jupiter's there. It's got this like window of time where Jupiter is moving through the final decan of Aquarius, making his business there. But it's kind of like this brief window, and then you got Saturn in your seventh house for the next couple of years, right? So it's kind of like it would be good to like, you've got that positive forward momentum of Jupiter, but you've got this window of time to really make the most out of it. And then like, I think Saturn in the seventh house is going to be like, if there are stuff to, there's going to be, it's not, you're going to have to deal with that Saturnian influence being pretty strong and powerful, and you've also that whole Saturn square Uranus thing going on for the whole year, like that's not going away anytime soon. And then it's gonna get set off by Mars next month too, right? So it's like, you've kind of.
But what you're saying though is Saturn is like a raining on the parade of that marriage or that business partnership. I mean, he's a heavyweight. He's but he wants to grow it up, make a solid foundation, make it work. But and Jupiter's working for him right now. But if you can't pull it off by the end of this year, then you're just left with Saturn.
It's kind of, I don't want to be like too negative about Saturn, but it feels like with Saturn in the seventh house, it's kind of a make or break kind of thing, right? It's like, because Saturn has to do with things that either last a long time, or Saturn has to do with things that end. Right. So it's like, it's either going to be like, you guys get through it and it's like rock solid and you're together forever, or else it's going to be like Saturn's going to put the wall and take out the scythe and cut the ending, right? So it's
some grim reaping.
Yeah, I don't know if that's too dark. I mean, it's Halloween time, right? So maybe
they were having Scorpio overlays.
The original Grim Reaper was Saturn, right? He was the guy with the scythe.
I found in my clients that go through a Saturn transit to the seventh house that it really is that 2-year period, 2.5 years of working on the relationship. And if they make it through, they built a new foundation. But if they don't, it doesn't last. And so that's a forewarned, forearmed for you Leos. And I have a few people I know in that situation right now who are Leo.
You know what I'm also thinking? Like, I mean, this just came to mind now, was that with thinking about how Jupiter is going to be in Pisces around New Year's, that this whole thing, this Mercury, Neptune, and Pisces might give us a little bit of a preview. I mean, I don't know if I'm stretching it too much though, right? But I mean, Jupiter is now moving towards Pisces, is going to be picking up speed, and Mercury, the communicator, the messenger, is having a secret communication with Neptune, who I don't do the modern rulerships, right? But like, you know, the modern astrologers say Neptune and Pisces has a connection and whatnot, but they're Mercury's getting a message from Neptune, and Jupiter is going to be headed in that direction next year, right? So it could be a bit of a forward vision of what, you know, a view of where Jupiter is going to end up, maybe, right? Like that,
Yeah,
maybe that's a take,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, well, I know I like that a lot. That's a really good point. That's around April 10th that they meet up in the sky, if I remember. So next year. So yeah, you know, pay attention to what's going on now from that Mercury. And don't forget, it could be real people, you know, Mercury in your third, aunts, uncles, cousins, and siblings can all kind of be third house people. You know, and this is your stress seventh house, getting some Jupiter juice that works for it in the next few months. So maybe, and the eighth house, of course, is the shared resources of the couple, like your spousal money, spouse's money. So I don't know what to say with that. Maybe a relative has some really good tips for you about dealing with the stress that you might experience in a primary business and love relationship, and that can influence you financially in a good way down the road. That's the best we can do. We got to keep moving though, because it is a tough one to work with Antisha. I put it in there with a cheerful smile, but now I'm like, oh God, this is tough. The Antisha is really hard to delineate. It's
That's the
almost
thing. I mean, it's hard to delineate because I mean, I learned it in Adam's or Chuta's class as well, right? But I'm not to knock Adam or anything or Chuta, but there's not a whole lot of information on what an Antisha really means or what it does, except for the fact that it's kind of a secret, hidden connection. Like the planets are work, but they don't. It's not. There's not like it's not the most talked about. It's kind of like a niche, obscure kind of aspect that I don't. If you ask other astrologers, I haven't heard people give a really fleshed out, detailed description of what's actually going on there. But I mean,
Mhm.
I mean, I guess with this kind of thing, we've got a perfect Antisha happening today, so we've got an opportunity, you know, look at the house of Libra and the house of Pisces, and we can observe and see to see if it makes any sense at all. What is real actually going on with this Antisha?
Exactly, exactly. So I mean, we'll see you know, the evidence will show up in what happens in our lives. We can all watch that part of the chart and hopefully make sense of it. Um, so then we have your turn first. We have I think it's yours, Virgo rising. So, and sun and moon people. What about that Jupiter going direct? What do you think?
Well, you got Jupiter going direct in the sixth house, and you know, you've got your classic sixth house stuff about either health or like I said, the less glamorous forms of work that you might be doing. Um, the sixth house is kind of considered to be a bad house in the sixth astrology, but it's nice to have a benefic there, giving its forward motion. Benefic influence helps out. um I think, and if you look at Mercury going direct in the second house, that has to do with, um, wealth and belongings, but it's also kind of like what your money that you make yourself and you in the kind of the product of your own work. So again, with the second and sixth, it's kind of like could be a good one for like putting the work in and seeing some results from it. Yeah, it's that second, sixth, 10th axis is very generally has to do with things like work and career and money making, whether and stuff like that. So you might see some movement around those areas of life.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Artha houses or the ambition houses or you know, material success houses when it comes to our you know, actions to create money and resources and career. You know, I do think that with Virgos having, you know, this is their ruler finally going direct, which is always a relief for all of, you know, the Gemini and Virgo people, because they feel most acutely when their own ruler is backwards in motion. Sometimes it's very magical for them, though. They're even better at capturing you know, God's messages through the messenger of the gods. But I also think that, you know, with Mars, that trine from Jupiter to Mars sort of signaling the very best of what that can be. which is really, you said, putting in that hard work, that determination to succeed, that focus, with the possibility of bounty or goodness coming from Jupiter from that connection, is really, really sweet. It looks to me a lot like somebody here, if some of you Virgo folk could find that you're going to be more financially successful and resourceful, second house, over the course of the next few months, especially as Jupiter still, as Dan keeps saying, is racing to the finish line at the end of December in your sixth house. So maybe rapid momentum in your health, because it's a house of sickness, so things to improve your health, and rapid forward momentum moving into that area of earnings and work. And it could even be, because Jupiter does mean luck and stuff, you could be unemployed looking for work, and this could be a great opportunity coming your way by dint of your efforts to apply for jobs. Really, it looks like a nice clean story, really, and certainly it will impact your finances in likely in a positive way. That gnarly Antisha is probably telling you something about your primary love story, relationship, or business partner, because Neptune is in your seventh house, and that means that those relationships are highlighted by Neptune. It's been a slog for most Virgo risings to have Neptune in that part of the chart. I know several Virgo risings have gone through so many disillusionments in love relationship since that journey of Neptune in that part of the sky for them since 2011, where they think they found the perfect soulmate, the romance of their life, the true partner, the dream partner, only to find that Neptune rose-colored glasses has obscured what is true. Although I will make one comment for you Virgo, so don't panic. I noticed that as Neptune passed the midpoint, the 15th degree for good of Pisces, that a lot of those stories turned around for you guys and turned into seeing more clearly and looking for that higher love that's possible. So, but with that Neptune there now, with an Antisha from Mercury, is there something that your primary love partner is keeping a secret from you that you don't know about, that is going to be revealed to you sometime soon? Does it involve possessions and money, or is it something they want to say to you, because that second house is the voice and they want to message it to you by telling you, but they haven't told you yet? There's just an example, and that sounds really far-fetched, but you're probably going to find out if that kind of story is true. I think most certainly after Neptune goes direct in early December. So park the thought, put it on your calendar and see if something doesn't pop out, like I don't know, like someone hands you a wedding ring because they're an engagement ring because they want to marry you. See how I make these incredibly fantastical stories? Now Dan will just say something very simple. Go ahead, Dan.
Well, I was with it. It's kind of funny because when we were doing these, we used to, earlier this year, we used to get together and do this a lot on Clubhouse, where we'd have these little sessions, and it kind of feels like that again. I haven't done it in a while, but I always had the impression that like Lori was always the optimist, and she was always trying to sell it with the honey and sugar and something. But it's like, no, I'm looking at this one and I'm feeling more optimistic about it, because like I said, I keep thinking about how Jupiter's the ruler of the seventh house, and Jupiter is going to be in the seventh house for 6 months or so in 2022. And it's like right now, though, like this Jupiter in the sixth house with Saturn, it's like the hard work, right? Like there's something that's happening now that's kind of like, you're kind of putting the hard work in, but it's going to pay off later. And that once, the next 3 months, when she gets through that slog, then Jupiter is in its own home sign in the seventh house. And I would generally see that as being a positive thing. Maybe I do know that Neptune can have, depending on how Neptune is hitting the planets in your natal chart, like I went through some really serious stuff when I had Neptune conjunct Mars, and I've talked to other people who have some really heavy duty, like people with Pisces placements being really messed up by Neptune. So I do think that Neptune has some definite negative associations with it that aren't to be taken lightly, and I don't want to just gloss over that. But I think that if anything, having Jupiter in its traditional own sign next year is something positive to look forward to anyways. That's basically what I'd have to contribute.
I am hopeful. I agree. I actually know somebody who has a pending. Well, I can't say it here because I'm disclosing client information, and they might listen, and then the other person might listen, and then I'm going to give away a positive secret. So
You shouldn't say it even if they're not listening, Laura. You should have
well, no, I mean just a client, no, but I realized that
our public YouTube videos.
I could give away a secret that one of the two people in my clients doesn't want the other one to know because it's a positive surprise. So anyway, moving on, but they're Virgo rising. Okay. Mm. All right, Libra sun, moon, and rising sign. And I think, who went first last time? You or me?
I think it was me that went first last time. I think it's your turn.
Okay, I'm losing track. All right, Libra folk. Well, hallelujah, right? Because with that retrograde Mercury in your first house of your body and your identity, and the you of you, for the last 3 weeks, it has maybe felt really difficult. Like maybe you felt like your communications have misfired. Maybe you felt like that things were tripping you up in your own life, or you tripped yourself up. And maybe in general, it doesn't feel good to be, in the milieu of Mercury's retrograde during that time. And then, certainly when it comes to things to do with your body, things may have also gone, backwards. You might have to go back and tend with an old health problem or an issue with your physical wellness. Anyway, that energy is moving forward out of that backtrack, and that's really lovely for you guys. So yay, Libra people, especially the rising Libras. But Jupiter in the joy house, what brings you joy, what brings you fun, what brings you pleasure, that's your natal 5th house. And he's a good time party guy. I always call him the great sperminator when he goes through someone's 5th house. I've had so many clients get knocked up despite rigorous birth control. So for some of you Libra youngins who have a partner or yourself who could be pregnant, this is Jupiter's last gasp as he races toward the finish line at the end of the year to inseminate somebody. So just be careful if you don't want a child. If you do, though, and you've been trying to have a baby, his direct motion can really support getting pregnant right now. And with Jupiter, you could even have like quadruplets. The other piece of that is romance has been stalled, maybe, or dating that didn't work, or you signed up on a Tinder or something, and then your account was shut down or whatever. Things are going to start to go forward in the romantic part of your life. And I think Mercury would like you to experience a feeling that your communication style is being well received by not only your children, the 5th house, but also those potential suitors, lovers, and sex partners that you might be hoping to experience in the next few months. And Saturn is nearby, as Dan always reminds us, kind of the party pooper maybe, but Saturn in the 5th house means you have to work hard to have fun. So maybe some of you Libras are feeling that Saturn is going to kibosh a fling, or you're going to find that there's a desire for sober love or serious love or enduring love. But I just think Jupiter could be bringing some action in the love part of the story as he goes direct, and he's been squashed in retrograde since, icky retrograde energy since June 21st. So feeling this momentum and this feeling of, I don't know, like relief about love stories could be really powerful. Any thoughts, Dan?
I was just thinking that Saturn in the 5th there would, you were talking about all this sort of like getting pregnant stuff. It's probably going to help with birth control to have Saturn in the 5th. You might not have to worry too much about it because it's that's
true. Thanks for that. Yeah. Saturn is like, no effing way. We're having 3 kinds of birth control. We're controlling the situation. Oh my God.
And yeah, I don't know if I have too much more to add, but I think with having that, we're in the middle of Libra season right now, and it's been pretty busy because we had it's kind of a shame, honestly, that I was out of commission in the hospital and I couldn't be doing astrology, because we had Mars and Mercury cazimi at the same time. There's this, it was near the time, about a week ago, it was around the time I got out of hospital. Not only was Mars and Mercury conjunct the sun in Libra, but the ruler of Libra, Venus, was on the self node. I was looking that one a month or in advance, or weeks in advance, what's going to happen on this day, right? So I think I I mean, I'm not really giving a delineation for what all this means for a Libra rising, but it's like the first house. So that has to do with the body, the self, the personality. You know, it's like you're going to be very familiar with these transits over what has happened in the last month, one way or another. And I think like it's in a way, it's kind of like the sun's going to be moving away from Mars now, and then not being, Mars is going to rise up as a morning star. Eventually they're going to get out of your first house, and but so it's sort of like I kind of feel like the action has already happened in Libra with that Mars, and Mercury just kind of represents kind of like the turning point, right? Like we're kind of at a turning point now where, you know, if there's any Libra risings, they know how the last month has gone for them, and now it's a kind of a pivot and a turning point. And then with Jupiter in the fifth house, it's like again, the house of joy. It's a bit more positive, but you're still dealing with that Saturn influence. So
Yeah. And also, you know, feeling that energy of a planet being born again in your first house, you know, Libra, for that Mars rebirth. The bigger meaning is a lot of you Libras are rebirthing yourself. And in the next 2 years, I talked about this in my Mars video, over the next 2 years, you're going to feel like, you know, you are redefining who you are. It's a rebirth of your identity, because Mars is initiated, the first house is a zone of story over the next 2 years. So it's a big time for you guys. And that nasty little pesky Tisha, I just think it's going to be like, okay, something in the work environment or the health environment. Neptune in the sixth house. Neptune there means your health problems are hard to define. People often like, you feel not well, but no one can find out what's wrong with you. I think Neptune there is also miracle healing should you need one. But anyway, he's Neptune is receiving that sneaky secret conversation from Mercury in your first house. I'm not even sure what to think about that. Any ideas, Dan? I'm really drawing a blank. Drawing a complete
well,
blank.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, the sixth house has to do with health stuff. And you've got that whole Mars thing in Libra. You know, Mars is combust. It's under the beams, but it's like, I feel like I don't know. It's kind of a messy situation. I kind of feel with having, you know, Mars in Libra in detriment in the first house. And we've been you know, the last few weeks we've been dealing with that energy. So it's nothing new at this point. I mean, I'm talking more about Mars here, but I'm just going to, because I think Mars has a joy in the sixth house. So that's why it's coming to mind for me. And you know, Mars, Sun, combustion, that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm also like, we're also about to do Scorpio, and like that's my right. Like, but
What
yeah,
what about there's a simple idea of some some foggy, confusing, hard to define health challenge. Mars is inflammation. Mars is, you know, sometimes cuts and accidents. But what about like some of you Libras just may have under the surface issue going on that it's hard to define. I do know a Libra rising who's having that right now, and maybe there's going to be momentum and clarity eventually. I mean, like I keep going when Neptune goes direct, because I think Neptune retrograde won't give clarity about anything, let alone clarity ever. So the direct is early December. So just pointing to, yeah.
It kind of goes well with it because it's a hidden, secretive kind of connection between Mercury and Neptune, and then Mars itself is under the beams, being obscured. So there's something about this dynamic which seems kind of like obscured, and but with the Mercury direct in with there might be like a, you know, a secret message coming through from Neptune, you know, some sort of maybe intuitive, right? Because it's watery, Pisces, some sort of an intuition about something to do with health or some kind of problem or something like that coming up. I don't know. That's the best I can do with it.
And I would say some of you Libras look to your non-ordinary healing modalities with that Neptune, maybe a faith healer, maybe a hands-on healer, maybe a shamanic healer. Okay, something like that. Alrighty. So Libras, we did our best with you. Sorry if that was really confusing, but we're doing our best. All right. I think it's your turn, Mr. Scorpio.
I'm actually, I don't know if we messed up the order or not, but this is funny because I have to do it from like, this is my rising sign, and I mean, it's hard for
Well,
me to
you
look
take
at it
it.
without.
It's your
What?
turn. You take. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I take it. Okay.
You take it.
Well, I mean, for me, it's very literal because I just got out of the hospital, and hospitals have to do with the 12th house, right? So that's to me, it's a very concrete thing. I had stuff go on. Like I'm just gonna talk about some of my personal stuff. Like on the day that Mercury went retrograde, I went basically I was in a high acuity ward where they're keeping a close eye on me because I had a blood clot in my lung. And then they're like, actually, you're doing pretty good. We're going to take you out of here. And then the day they took me out, or the day after, was the day that Mercury went retrograde. And then I had a big problem where I was bleeding. And then they're like, we're sending you right back to the high acuity. So it was like, I literally did a 180 and went back to where I went. And I was, to be honest, like a lot of people talk about the fear of, well, I don't know, I mean, problems with technology and things breaking. I also had, man, I do make music, and I had a piece of music gear that I use a lot break when I got home, which wasn't very fun. Another example, I mean, this is completely random stuff, but I'm living with my family, and their fridge, before I went to the hospital, the fridge was, it looked like we needed a new fridge. It wasn't heating. It wasn't keeping things cold enough. Things were going off in it. We had to move things to a little mini fridge, right? Now it's like the vegetables are frozen solid in the fridge. It's like the fridge is, it's like really literal Mercury retrograde stuff. The fridge, I mean, I don't know how that has to do with the 12th house, but this is the Mercury retrograde stuff that's been happening. Is the fridge is having the complete opposite problem all of a sudden.
Well, it's an interesting thought. I can see how your music equipment got screwed up because the house of the artistic, creative stuff is the fifth, and Venus exalts that fifth house. Oh, it's Venus. Yeah, I forget. We're talking about Mercury. Oh, yeah, but it's in Venus's sign. I'm trying to draw a wind around about why it affected your.
Well, I was thinking, I made a whole video on Venus and the South Node. Like Venus is already like 10 degrees or 11 degrees now away from the South
Yeah.
Node, but I was noticing there's a lot of stuff with like where this feeling of like the South Nodes creates this kind of sense of a lack or an absence, or it can like take things away, and Venus being about creative stuff or about I also been noticing, like I've had this whole thing, like I was talking in my video that I made about like noticing my tendency about like I'm being very strict about my health now. I'm not drinking, I'm not smoking, I'm not even drinking coffee, right? But I'm kind of putting I'm seeing that energy of addicted kind of, I'm like, I want to buy stuff to make myself, rather than pouring coffee down my throat or something like that to perk me up. I'm like, I want to, get a new toy, or I want to go clothes shop, retail therapy and all. But the feeling that kind of self node, the empty pit with the self node or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so for Scorpio, I mean, that could apply for Scorpio risings. That's the second house. I mean, I'm kind of getting off topic here, but that's the second house to do with belongings and Venus there. Like that's one thing I've been noticing as a Scorpio rising. And Venus is ruling over the 12th house where Mercury just went direct. So that kind of stuff could play in, like that combination of the South Node and Venus and Mercury retrograde now going direct, all those kind of things to do with the belongings and stuff like that plays into it.
Well, yeah, and something though, it's it's a sweet spot for you Scorpios in a way, hospital aside, because Mercury's going direct and sextiling the house of possessions where Venus is traveling in Sagittarius, and then trining Jupiter in the house of your domestic life, so this could suddenly turn around this sort of sense of frustration and loss around things you own and don't own and can't own or whatever, from that 12th house. But I like that. To me, like that 12th house can also be about that interiority of our lives, like going into our own inner contemplation or contemplative place. And Mercury's direct, so you can have that kind of, I don't know, contemplation or communication from the inside of your mind, from your divine source, from your inspired higher self, about what possessions you really need or want. Venus is trying to possess you with possessions in your second house, what kind of earnings you really need or want. And then of course Jupiter in the fourth house is trying to bountify and expand your home, your domestic life, your private life, the root of your life.
Yeah,
um,
and actually, I do like we talked about this a little bit, but I do like last night. I mean, I didn't get the greatest sleep last night, but I did remember having a lot of dreams and being woken up from like one of the things that I remember from. I mean, this is just because it could just be because I mean that my health problems are mainly digestive problems, but I remember food being a very strong theme in the dreams, right? Like where you get, what restaurant are we going to for food? What am I ordering? This and all these kinds of like that being a theme that would come up. And I've also there like I remember months ago leading up to this, I would have these dreams where it would be like you being hungry, but like the only food was like this really miserable looking hot dog stand or something like that, where you're like, what, this is the only food around, that's all I can get, like. So
mhm.
there's something about like, I mean, food is a very like, if you watch certain movies and they see how they use food symbolic, like it's very like primal, like our basic like biological urges coming out. I don't know, I'm kind of going off on a tangent
Well,
here,
but you
right?
know
But
what? No, because food is a second house. I mean, so the bottom line is some of you, things you put in your mouth, some of you Scorpio people out there, especially rising sign, with balance, Libra in a sign of Mercury, in a sign of balance, intuition and inner life guidance. Venus in that place where you put things in your mouth, food and drink. And then of course, Jupiter just trying to expand the whole story. And there's like a chain of reception here, but we won't have time to talk about that. But the gist I feel is kind of a sense of, the bottom line for Scorpio people with this particular direct motion, home, right, fourth house, the anchor of the chart, and that interior life, that hidden life that you have inside of yourself, or contemplative off to the side life, are somehow coming into a harmony, because there's a trine from there's a whole sign trine from Mercury to Jupiter. And maybe because Jupiter is going direct, right, Dan, you might move. A lot of Scorpios will. I know my son's a Scorpio rising, and he's a very good likelihood that this Jupiter is propelling a sale of a property that he and his woman own together. And that should, if that's going to go through, that would be that whole exciting momentum of Jupiter racing through to the end of this year in that bottom part of the chart. Maybe some of you Scorpio risings are going to, and Sun and Moon, are going to find a great new opportunity for moving somewhere.
yeah, that's another thing that I should mention, is that like for me, there's a kind of a background to this, was that I kind of got more sick after, like I was living in Vancouver Island for a while with a roommate, and then I moved back with my family, with my mom and my sister this year in the summer, and then kind of like shortly after I moved back, I got sick.
Oh, so during
Um,
the Jupiter retrograde, you mean like around June 21st?
yeah, I mean, it was like I technically it was a little bit earlier that I it was like the beginning of June that I officially moved back in, right? And so like I'd already been a couple weeks into it by the time Jupiter went retrograde. But there's something about, yeah, I mean, it did approximately time up with this whole question of where am I living? And not only, I mean, the fourth house has to do with the actual physical space you're living in, and it has to do with the land you're on. It also has to do with your family.
Yeah, but you know something,
It's
Jupiter retrograded from the Pisces quarter on July 28th into, as he was swooping back into your fourth house. So on July 28th or so, when he's retrograding, there's probably, that's when some real challenges must have come up for you. Because he's in the house of home. Like, did you go to the hospital then, or?
oh, so what were the dates you were saying again?
July 28th is when he crossed the border, retrogradation border, from Pisces into your fourth house, into Scorpio's
Well,
fourth.
I mean, I can say that I didn't end up going to the hospital until like basically the beginning of September. I was basically there for like the whole month of September. In from late July into August, it was like I was getting more seriously sick, and I probably should have just checked myself into the hospital around then. But I was, I this is the thing. I don't want to spend too much time on my own stuff here, but I was like I kind of had these things happen before as like an underlying condition, but they got better on their own. They didn't just get so bad that it hospitalized me. So I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll do the things and I'll get, but it didn't happen that way. Right. But it was that what I was getting sick around the time it retrograded into Aquarius. And there were certain stresses about, I mean, kind of doing the millennial thing of like, it's expensive and I'm taking the easier road of like living with my family rather than hunting for in a crappy, the real estate it's slim pickings basically sometimes when you're house hunting
Yeah.
I there's something too about that Saturn influence in the fourth house, which is like can come out in different ways. Like my mom is in her 60s now, and there's certain things that is coming to my mind, like, okay, she's definitely a senior citizen at this point, and she's not as capable as she used to be. And, like there's things like that of like, it's a
Well,
different dynamic being an adult kid and having kind of a senior parent that you're living with kind of thing. Right.
you know what? There's another point we didn't bring up. So listen here, listen up, Scorpio, sun, moon, and rising signs. Your fourth house, is always in the deer house. It's the bottom of the chart, and it has to do with the underworld journey, the dark night of the soul, the wanders in the wilderness. Those that part of the chart, like a perfection age in the fourth, is often a time of hardship. I've seen it over and over again. So even with Jupiter there, Mr. Santa Claus, it's still a hardship house when he's retrograde under the dominion of Saturn. So, it's a moksha house, it's a liberation house. Spiritually, like the spiritual liberation house, like the fourth, the eighth, and the 12th in Indian astrology. So, you can never just always go, it's about real estate. Things that happen in that fourth house for you Scorpio folk, they can be very trying and very, very difficult. And it's not all a bed of roses. And Saturn is there for another, 2 years, as Dan has mentioned, it's in March of 23. So I don't think you have a 2-year dark night of the soul. I'm just saying that Jupiter's retrogradation there, Jupiter being a good guy, by the way, could have meant some really deep, trying, challenging, and difficult circumstances that ultimately, though, as he goes direct, are turning around and bringing you something sweet. We're not going to do Intisha for you guys because we're going to run out of time. Let me check the time because I've got an appointment and I have to be ready. So we're not going to try to rush everybody, but I just realized what time it was. So sorry, guys, we're not going to muddle you up with that Intisha. They're like, I don't care about the Intisha, but yeah, Dan.
Well, we only have the winter signs to go, so we're 3/4 through it.
I know we're definitely off schedule in terms of our pithiness. Okay, so I'll go. So if we rush you guys at the very end, that's my fault. I have an appointment I have to be ready for at 6. So, well, what time do you say was popping over? I have my phone, so if he calls me, let me make sure I have my phone.
We've got half an hour to 6.
I know. No, but I don't know. He says coming between 5:30 and 6. Okay, I think I'll hear it on my laptop. But after I whip through this, I'm going to get my phone so that if he pings me, he's picking up some fabric for a friend. Okay, so let's go. Sagittarius, sun, moon, and rising sign. You guys are having Jupiter going direct in your third house of short trips and travel, skill-based learning, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, and often your ideas you have, sometimes a house of writing. Certainly for some of you Sagittarius, if you're on a trip already or want to travel and things have been stuck, this can really move that momentum forward. And if you want to learn something, Jupiter is guide, instructor, teacher in a house of skills-based learning. So this is really good for picking up a new skill and taking some sort of course that would give you that new ability. And if he's going direct, this could be where you either learn about the opportunity or that where your application for some school may be accepted, and that kind of thing. I also feel like good news could happen from and about your sibling. So some of you Sagittarius, it might not even be about you. It may be about a sibling having something really exciting happen, some good news, or a breakthrough in a connection, or a difficult strained connection with a sibling. Mercury in the house of good spirit and the 11th house is bringing good spirit. So finally he's direct, maybe some support or allies from people in your social groups and circles coming out of the blue to help you out in things to do with your financial gain from your career, great gains in general, maybe even your helping you aspire to one of your wishes or help you achieve one of your goals. I do think that the energetic, whole sign trine energy between the air energies of Mercury and Jupiter with that support from Mars, Jupiter, Mars don't try and don't have problems with each other. They're quite, I think, cooperative. You could have some serious momentum here in a particular goal that you can achieve, but you may have to accomplish it by first learning something, or perhaps there might be a trip involved that's necessary in order to actualize that goal. So I'm passing the baton to Dan while I just get my phone so I don't miss the fabric pickup guy. Okay. So you're on. I can hear you.
It's funny that you mentioned the sibling thing, because my sibling is Sagittarius rising, so it does kind of fit in a way. And I don't know, I'm just being a lazy astrologer here, and I'm just but she's had some good like opportunities of people offering her different jobs and stuff like that. And but I don't. So I think with the Mercury direct in the 11th house, it's like you could have the those beneficial connections giving you an opportunity. It's still, like, again, it's still been kind of a mess there with Mars combust and stuff, but that's not going to be there for too long. Pretty soon that's all going to move to Scorpio. And but yeah, like I think yeah, you might get some good opportunities with the Mercury direct in the 11th house.
Interesting to hear about that sibling bit. That's cool. Yeah, and I'm not going to go deep into Antisha because it's confusing as all F, but basically some kind of foggy confusion and delusion or deception or mysterious uncertainty in the home environment for some of you Sages could be receiving some interesting news that's still maybe developing a bit behind the scenes, for all I know, from a friend or an ally with Mercury up in the 11th. I do know a Sag rising who's had a lot of challenges regarding things going on in the home life, domestic life, but it's all been so confusing and uncertain about how to resolve it because the actual problem hasn't been figured out. So, I mean, like, because there's problems figuring out why there's a problem. So maybe a friend will come by, an ally would go like, oh, obviously this is why things aren't working out with your partner, because you are a slob and a pig. I just, maybe some friendly advice from Mercury about what's going on in your confusing home life. Oh my God. Okay, let's keep going, Dan. We got this. I haven't heard from the fabric pickup guy yet. So he said he'd ping me. So I'll keep my ear open.
Okay, so let's on to Capricorn.
Yay. All right. You start.
So what do we have? We got Jupiter direct in the 2nd house and Mercury direct in the 10th house. So I mean, it's a good one for. This is, I mean, it's kind of typical with because everyone associates Capricorn with work, like the hardworking Billy Goat climbing the mountain and stuff. But you've got Mercury direct in the 10th house, all about your daily grind. 2nd house is your wealth that you're making for yourself. This is not going to be about like making the getting rich quick or making like the cryptocurrency investment. Like, this is more about putting like the sweat and effort into it, and seeing. I think with Jupiter direct in the 2nd house, there might be the potential to, I mean, it's kind of interesting because I think the 5th house is often like the fruits of your labor, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a sort of like the square between Saturn and Capricorn has been, between Saturn and Uranus has been putting tension on that whole thing about like, the efforts to see the results of your work and stuff like that, I would say, right? And Jupiter direct, there might be some forward momentum now, seeing your efforts actually pay off, basically, right? Over the course from now until New Year's. That's kind of like the first thing that comes to mind anyways. Do you have any ideas, Laurie?
Yeah, no, I love that you brought the 5th house in with that Uranus piece. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, Capricorns are steady and hardworking and diligent anyway, energy. They don't necessarily look for a windfall, but like the quality of windfall, that's when a bunch of apples fall off the tree. And the reason I'm bringing up that word, because the wind blew, is that to get to that point, the tree was, ripening and the rain was falling and there was like, work before the fall of the apples or the harvest or whatever you want to call it. of your hard work. And I do wonder a bit about that. I mean, with Jupiter going into that direct motion in the money house and moving fast, I think that's a key. You know, he's whipping along now. He's going to pick up speed and get faster and faster and faster and faster as the year progresses until he leaves around the 29th of December in that corridor. He's slow now because he's just stationed, but he's starting to pick up speed. And I'm wondering if there's not going to be this real like end finish strong for you Capricorns around your money, your career, and maybe the sense of accomplishing a harvest of something from the work you've done. We know that a lot of people in corporate settings get a bonus at the end of the year. That could be what we're looking at. But we also could be looking at other kinds of momentum in your career that you might need to improve your finances, like finally getting the promotion that you need or deserve for all the hard work you've been putting in. And I think now with the Mercury direct, you may get some news in the next, till Mercury leaves Libra. I forgot the date now because he's there for a dog's age, but when does he leave Libra again?
I think
So
both Mercury, I was gonna talk actually about Venus going into Capricorn, but I think Mercury and Venus both leave their ingress into the next sign around the beginning of November.
it's November for Venus. So I think that's a similar, yeah. So around the same time for Mercury. I mean, in other words, for you Capricorns, a lot of goodness because of Venus entering your first house. As Dan said, money goddess herself in your first house makes you charismatic, persuasive and stuff. But also maybe some good stories around gains of reputation and money swing into gear around that November 5th onwards sort of energy.
Yeah, it's November 5th, Mercury goes into Scorpio. I'm just checking it here. And that, yeah, it is November 5th. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting for Capricorn rising because you've got next year you're gonna have a Venus retrograde in the first house too. So I don't know. I'm not even sure where I'm.
This way. You know, Venus is going to be in the first house of Capricorns. That's another video I'm going to be doing from November 5th until early March, I believe. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's a lot of Venus in Capricorn.
Yeah, it's 4 months. So it's
that's almost like that 6 months Mars retrograde.
I know that was crazy that 6 months Mars retrograde in 20. So I think though it's good though. Think about this Capricorn Venus. She's going to retrograde on December 19th. It's January 29th. You'll have to go back over old ground. But in general, you got a benefic with shoulder pads, boss babe shoulder pads in your first house for 4 months. And that's going to serve you to get what you desire, to get what you value, and to maybe be very persuasive and charismatic, seductive about what you need to get in your life with the Venus energy.
I also think, I think with like Venus as being a benefic, like I'm not the kind of person, I think that a lot of modern astrology or pop astrology, it's tempting to be like Chicken Little whenever there's a retrograde and think the sky is going to fall or something like that. Whereas like, I think, having a Venus, like the planet is kind of like going back over all the stuff and making, it's like really sorting the business out in that house over 4 months, and having like a benefic do that in your first house. I don't necessarily see that as being a negative thing. Like, I mean, it could be, you could have to change some things up maybe, or like,
you have to redo the botched nose job.
Yeah.
Cosmetic surgery redos, oh my God.
Something like that.
It will be literal though. Or your wardrobe, that you thought was going to work, it sucks, and you have to redo the wardrobe. Some things to do with your appearance, going back over old ground. But we're getting off track. That's another video. I'm going to skip.
Okay, let's keep moving. Let's go to let's not get bogged down.
Yeah, we'll get bogged down. It's the far flung.
I don't know if I'm doing. This is my first time doing one of these in a long time since being sick, and I don't know if I'm being super professional about it. But I'm just kind of spitting out whatever comes to my mind because I'm really just winging it here.
We're both winging it. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. We're jamming.
It's kind of fun though. I mean, my dad was a jazz musician, so it reminds me of like improv, right? It's like just, make it up as you go along.
You see things I see things you don't see. We see things for each other. So yay for Aquarius, me, sun, moon, and rising. I have to take it. It's me. So and I know whose turn it is. I am so fucking relieved. Excuse my language. I felt like a breath of fresh air opened up. All my pores felt like relieved of the blackheads or something this morning when I got into bed and felt that Jupiter's energy had shifted or was shifting, and now Mercury's actually shifted today as well in Pacific time after 3 p.m. or so. So I'm feeling really hopeful. And as I said earlier, I had a great dream. I had insights, feeling good is like the best vibe for it. And I have to say, Jupiter retrograde for Aquarius rising, I don't know how all you other Aquarius rising sun and moons have felt, but he has not done a retrograde for us for 12 years in our home sign. So it's not something we're used to. It's true for all signs. But I found that I had to go back over physical things to do with my body, and I had problems with my body, and Jupiter, of course, god of solutions, was helping me find them. But it was the retrograde of Saturn and then the retrograde of Jupiter as a 1-2 step that really, really hit my body hard. So some illnesses came out of remission and some injuries happened. And so for some of you guys, it's like your body, you Aquarians, your sense of self, your sense of confidence, your sense of confidence especially, is coming back online. And you're starting to feel, I hope, like a little bit more optimistic, a little bit more magnanimous, a little bit more leaderful, and a little bit more full of good Jupiter jovialness. And I'm just saying, we just started to feel this today, but it has been a bit offline, especially since July 28th, when he was retrograding in that first house. Although he's been retrograde since the 21st of June. So think about yourself getting expansive and more lucky in general. You are lucky, not things around you, over the next few months as he finishes his course through our first house, Aquarius, is until the end of the year. I do like that Mercury is finally direct as well. I had a lot of issues with it this one, but that's my problem. I have an Aries stellium. But in the 9th house, forgetting about foreign lands, foreign travel, and higher education, because those are themes in which things may have gone backwards a bit in order to jump forward again. But deeper than that, a lot of people who are Aquarius rising, given you have 2 big planets in your first house, Jupiter and Saturn, are definitely looking at redefinition of purpose, meaning of your life, the dharmic energy of why am I even here, what's my reason for being on the planet. And I have been going through that. So I want to encourage a lot of Aquarius rising especially, but sun and moon to some extent, people, to feel that now that uncertainty is giving way to certainty, and that quagmire of sluggishness around those deeper questions of your purpose and directionality may have new fresh momentum. That's my take. What do you want to mention about that, Dan?
One thing that came to mind was that I got a Guido Bonatti book on horary, and I was flipping through it. I thought was interesting is that when he said for anything there's a whole chapter there on dream interpretation, like if you want to use a horary chart to interpret dreams, and he was saying it's basically all the 9th house. Where which is kind of funny because like I guess it's not being inconsistent, because when it comes to astrology, it's not actually like things are specifically one house or the other. Because we were talking about 12th house being dream, because people often talk about 12th house as being dreams and the subconscious and stuff, but they're both cadent houses. It's not like, but yeah, the 12th house and the 9th house both work really well for dream interpretation. And it's also kind of interesting because there's also had the Sun square Pluto, which just happened, lighting up both 12th house and 9th house, right? So and then you've got Mercury making that Antitia to Neptune, which is also pretty dreamy, right? So those are just some things that came to mind. We're having that stacked 9th house being very kind of like visionary, messages from beyond, higher, that's just what came to my mind anyways.
Well, and I will tell you, Aquarius rising people out there, because it's my experience, and you may have had it as well. I had several offers to travel during the retrograde from different people, like to join a friend in Lisbon, to coming up for a trip, but the consideration I should join her came up, to go to a kind of an ashram in Mexico. And the problem was, first of all, it's retrograde, so I'm not buying a ticket and making a decision yet, right? Obviously, I just don't feel good about that. But it was really because the retrogradation travel to foreign shore opportunity, 9th house, came up during the retrograde. I found myself going deeper into the question of why am I going to travel? Like, in other words, I've got so much I want to do. I've got so much I want to create and achieve. And is this necessary? Is this trip frivolous? Is it, I bet a lot of Aquarius risings during the retrograde were given opportunities for travel. If you took it, let me know. And did it go okay? Or did you wait and just germinate the decision and let it
But Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be like the party pooper with this one, but when it comes to all that action with Mars combust and Cassini, and then you've had Venus. I mean, well, I mean, before Venus was in Scorpio, that's what I was talking in my video that I recorded the other day, that I honestly think that like I found the mutual reception to be with Venus and Scorpio to be more positive. With this Venus in the self node, I almost feel like that's kind of like a kind of a negative influence on Venus, right? So it's sort of, when you put all that together, I don't really see like that optimistic of an outlook for travel, with especially, let's say, your 11th house of friends and the people, you know, like there's that
Sure.
like the it's kind of like the black hole kind of effect of,
Yeah,
I kind of feel like with the
what it
self
would
node,
be,
right?
would be unpleasurable travel.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be as fruitful for friendship as you would like. Because Sagittarius is Jupiter's sign and it's often associated with travel. And you might find that, funny enough, I was invited to kind of a spiritual community in Mexico, right? That's so nice. 11th house for Aquarius is, you get invited to an ashram like I did. Well, with Venus on the South Node, you would have gotten there and wondered why you were probably
Well,
there.
I guess to qualify that though, they do say the self node, especially the self node in Sagittarius, I think is good for like spiritual non-attachment, right? And you're like letting go of your worldly possessions, and you're, like it could be the thing like where you go to the ashram and you're in silence all the time, you meditate and you don't talk to anybody, but it's like, it's not, that's not exactly what I've heard. I got really into meditation for a while, and it's actually, I don't talk about it all the time, but I remember this guy Adi Ashanti would say that like sometimes couples would go to his meditation retreats, and then after like a few days of being in silent meditation, they're just like, I think we should probably break up. You know what I mean? Like it's like they go there like they're gonna be like, it's like we're a spiritual couple and it's so great that we can share this together. And then like after a few days of meditating, they're like, oh, I'm so disillusioned. It's like
Yeah, I totally
it's
get
not
it. I totally get it. Yeah. And I think that Venus would let go of that like earthly love, and with the South Node, this would not have been a good trip for me, by the way, because I was invited by a guy who was interested in me to his, in quotes, ashram, but I wouldn't call it an ashram. Spiritual community may be a better word for it. But anyway, here's the thing, without getting too personal, Aquarian, sun, moon, and rising, you are just simply getting turned back on. Saturn's already finally direct again as of the 10th of October in your house of you. And now Jupiter's gone direct in the house of you. So you've been off, like you've been just off. Someone unplugged you for quite a while, like seriously, since May 23rd for Saturn and July 28th for Jupiter, in terms of the retrograde through your first house. And so all of a sudden now you feel like somebody put you back online, and that's the best news possible. So let's move on to Pisces. This guy hasn't called me yet, but he's coming in from the airport to pick up a bunch of stuff here. All right. And now I'm giving Dan the Pisces story. Finish strong, Dan.
Okay. Well, I mean, again, I'm going into this completely unprepared, but you've got, it's automatically not looking like a very easy one for Pisces rising, because you've got Saturn in the 12th, and then you've got Mercury in the 8th, which are some of the more difficult houses of the zodiac. Not the zodiac, the whatever. You can tell we're at the very end now. Like this is classic Pisces fashion, right? Like we're at Pisces and Neptunes and it's all, I'm misspeaking and stuff. But what can I say?
How about the 12th house being that aversion to the ascendant? So it's kind of very invisible action here.
Yeah, I mean, like with your Pisces, you've got Jupiter rising, and Jupiter is in Saturn's territory. Saturn in this kind of chart has both dignity by sign, being powerful in Aquarius, and dignity being doing a 12th house transit. Like Saturn in its joy in the 12th house, when a powerful Saturn is like nothing to mess with. Basically, it's like but with Jupiter having this direct thing, it is a positive influence, and now Jupiter is kind of on the runway to land in the first house around New Year's. So it's sort of like, this is almost like, to me, kind of feels like, that's darkest before the dawn kind of thing. But I'm almost like, man, I can't, like, I've got a friend who's a Pisces who I kind of had a falling out with, but I'm like, the guy was seriously getting into trouble. I mean, you wouldn't have Pisces rising, but you can kind of use derivative houses, right? And
Mhm.
it's like with a chart like this, it's sort of like, it's like, like I'm looking like Pisces, you're in jail, you're like, but at least you got a parole hearing coming up, and you know what I mean? It's like that's honestly, that's kind of like what I'm. It could just be that I
Well,
don't
no,
know, like I'm
but you're
worn
right.
out at
I
the
mean,
end.
no, but for the Pisces rising, Jupiter is your lord of your chart, and that was derivatively true for Sun and Moon Pisces as well, solar and lunar. And so, the lord of the chart is the house of hospitals, insane asylums, and incarceration and confinement, with the jailer himself, Saturn. And I know a Pisces rising, it's my sister, and she's been feeling like she's been really in a bad place because of something that happened that wasn't her fault. So I'll tell the story because it reflects what could happen to some of you guys. She had a PayPal account for her business online that she was doing tarot readings, and it's called blind faith readings. And all of a sudden, just as Saturn went into retrograde, PayPal pulled a plug on her account and said she was shut down for mysterious, nefarious, or unsavory dealings. They've got all of her money that was in her account on hold until the end of December. That's so effed up, but that's how difficult that was for her. Jupiter, the lord of her ascendant, is in jail, in confinement, in constriction in the 12th house. And of course, this Mercury retrograde going direct in a money house that doesn't belong to you, bank loans, bankers, PayPal, credit cards, going direct probably for her is going to simply, for example, be the liberation of her money, or news that she's going to be able to get it back, maybe even sooner than she thought, or a resolution of this weird thing. She didn't do anything wrong, by the way. It was bizarre, and there's no recourse for that. You can't get any legal counsel. You have to hire a lawyer and pay money to find out why they shut your account down. And they said they're not going to turn it around no matter what anyway. So, and she's not allowed to ever have a PayPal account again. So crazy. So this really took her under, and it's been a dark night for her and a really difficult soul search to deal with the 12th house matters. And I always say this on my channel, but one of the ancient traditions of the 12th to do with the foreign lands concept was barter and trade with other nations and distant lands. And when we think about PayPal and Stripe accounts, they are doing that. They allow us to use barter and trade by means of electronic devices with foreign lands. So it literally shut her down in that part of the chart. So I want to say for Pisces, like Dan said, without getting all my sister's story in here, a lot of you guys are going to feel like you got out of jail when Jupiter crosses the finish line around the 29th of December and comes into that first house, moving forward really, really quickly for the first 4.5 months of 2022.
Yeah, and I'm thinking like, I mean, it kind of applies to everybody because we're all going through this whole like coronavirus, COVID kind of situation, right? But I mean, it's like it it's a very 12th house kind of situation for a lot of people, because a lot of people aren't having the same kind of social life they're used to. A lot of people like they find like the lockdown kind of mentality to be kind of oppressive. So even if you're not literally in jail or something like that, this could be something that could be like wearing on people. It could be coming out in not as extremely whatever, more subtle ways, right? But I think, like, again, if anything, I think it's still optimistic to have Jupiter turn direct and having a year where the lord of your ascendant is going to be well dignified in its own sign. I think that's still something to look forward to. And things are kind of you're still going to have Saturn there in the 12th for the next couple of years though. So
That's a,
but
that's a strong placement though in Aquarius for those Pisces, because he's dignified, as you said, and it can be a really intense time of spiritual awakening or deepening in your sort of Senex wise woman, even if you're or old man, even if you're not old. It's just it could be a very deep spiritual time of getting rid of your self undoing between now and March of next year, or the ways you defeat yourself, sabotage. I would also say money momentum for you Pisces. I mean, just having Mercury go direct in a bank loans, finances, inheritances, spousal money house and stuff, you're going to have some fresh momentum around financial things coming up for you over the next where are we, 3 weeks. So yeah, so we finished up, and I said finish strong, and I think we did, because we finished with the sign that's going to have the best time next year as Jupiter joins into that Pisces zone. I'm going to stop the share. This guy said he'd be here by 6, but he's not here, but nonetheless I'll be ready for him. My hair's a mess. It's getting dark in Vancouver. We went 2 hours almost. Oh my God.
Yeah, I think the 45 minutes was a little bit I'm also kind of playing around with my audio thing here because I noticed that my sound quality says I'm not used to using I'm using this microphone setup or whatever, and it's this is like an old microphone that used to belong to my dad's that I have hooked up to my iPad. I don't know how well it works, right?
That is so cool. That is so
yeah,
cool.
I have a little like adapter that lets for it's kind of designed for people who want to like sing and play guitar to just like record some stuff pretty easily or whatever. I use it for music stuff, but it works for doing videos too. It kind of serves multi-purpose. But
and also he aspired to be either a rock star or a DJ, like an MC. That's why he likes to put the mic in front of his mouth. All right, Dan, thank you for being such a fun participant in this very in-depth Jupiter / your Mercury direct. I'm going to put the video up tonight, I think, in a premiere on October 18th. So stay tuned for that. I just have to do the timestamps and do a little organizing and stuff, and then we're good to go. In the meantime, I'm going to make sure that I don't miss this guy. He's going to ring the doorbell. So, okay.
Well, thanks for having me, Lori. It's been fun.
You're welcome. You too. Ciao, ciao. Thanks for playing along.
Okay. Thanks.
Bye.
Right. Bye.